Girls, 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 I just love me some girls. Let me be frank, women can be some of the best characters in all of fiction, and can also be some of the most contentious. And that's not even the fact that sometimes people will push ideologies or their own thoughts onto them. But as for me, I don't really care for that. I just like it when the characters are well written, as well as the audience can glean from them. Well, unless the writing beats you over the head with it. So today I figured we'd talk about what makes a good girl character and what makes a bad woman character. And for some spice, let's talk about fun tropes. Most notably, the damsels in distress. Not gonna bring up that trash fire! But yeah, there's actually a right, a wrong, and a fun way to do damsels in distress. Spoilers for the following games. I'm MangaKamen, and today we'll be talking about damsel in distress. So join me and let's go save a princess or two. Before we can really get into the examples, we need to discuss what a damsel in distress is. Just so you guys know where I'm coming from with this video and so we can learn at least something fun today. Because knowledge is power and knowing is half the battle.
I think you screwed up those lines a bit.
Anyway, the first time that we saw the term damsel in distress was in the 1692 Sylvia's Complaint by Richard Ames. Most people know the term because it's a narrative device that's been used in a lot of media, and it generally contains the following. A girl finds herself kidnapped or placed in peril, and a man or men must rescue her. Kinship, love, lust, or any combination can act as the motivation to start the narrative. And while the girl can be competent, she can still fall into this trope and become powerless. Damsels in distress have been cited as an example of differential treatment of genders in literature, film, and works of art. And it should be obvious that a trope like this, especially when it's been cast in the gender roles, would be considered regressive. And while there is some truth to that, not every implementation of the trope is terrible or used poorly. I've often said that it isn't the trope that's the problem. It's how the trope is used that can be. And with damsel in distress tropes, there are variations to it. Obviously, tropes can be done well, they can be done poorly, they can be justified, and they can be turned on their heads. There are probably a lot more variations, but I, as a YouTuber with dwindling brain capacity thanks to Twitter and YouTube Shorts, my words work no good no more in my brain. At the core of damsel distress, it is simply the hero saving someone. That is the bare bones of it. And with that logic, Luigi from the recent Mario movie was more of a damsel in distress than Peach was, and Peach is the poster girl for this trope in video games. Speaking of princesses...
Perfect candidate for the study. Go on. Taste it.
The Legend of Zelda, probably the second most iconic game series that uses this trope, and it uses it in varying ways actually throughout its time on this little blue marble we call Earth. Do not get me wrong, Zelda, the titular princess, does go into this role quite a bit, but the role throughout the series has been played around with in multiple ways. This is often because Zelda, while being a damsel, does things to help fight against the evil that captures her. In contrast, the usual stereotypical damsel in distress doesn't really help out whatsoever. That isn't to say The Legend of Zelda hasn't done that. In the Oracle games, Zelda, if you link their games, does use this trope very straight when she gets kidnapped. Twice. Hell, the other two female leads in those games, Din also gets kidnapped and Nehru gets possessed by the big baddie. In Wind Waker, we're first introduced to Tetra, a pirate captain who not only gives us the funniest scene in the entire game, but then becomes Zelda later in it. And when she does, she essentially becomes more of a background character until the final boss fight. Even in the sequel, Phantom Hourglass, Tetra's missing and she spends the other half as a statue. So no butt-kicking pirate princess for you, boys and girls! Conversely, if you look towards Spirit Tracks, while Zelda's physical form is kidnapped, her spirit isn't. And she has the ability to possess armor and help Link throughout the adventure, so while she is still technically a damsel in distress, she still has an active role in the adventure and can help out. Then, if we get to Twilight Princess, Zelda doesn't necessarily get kidnapped. Rather, she surrendered herself and later on sacrificed her life to save Midna. Well, it appears to be the case, cause she comes back and helps in the final part of the game. I think at this point you guys can tell there have been times where the trope has been played straight with The Legend of Zelda, but it's also been played around with and even at times been turned on its head. If we even look at the CDI games, well, Zelda became the main character in the second one.
You've killed me!
Good.
This is also the case with the latest two games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In Breath of the Wild, we get the inversion of the damsel in distress since we learn that Zelda is the one who's holding back Calamity Ganon, and the girl's been doing it for over 100 years. Link isn't exactly a hero coming to save the princess in the castle, rather he's the cavalry. And it gets inverted in the sequel, as while the story makes it out like Zelda is captured by the reanimated corpse of Ganondorf, we actually learn that Zelda goes back in time, and during that, we learn that Zelda does help with the war against Ganondorf, becoming the Sage of Time and becoming extremely powerful. And sure, she and the royalty back then may have lost the quest in actually destroying Ganondorf. Zelda does what she can, using her future knowledge and even going to the point of becoming a dragon so that way when the Master Sword was broken, she can use her dragon powers to fix it. She does have an active role within the story and isn't a damsel in distress because of it. I know there's probably a lot more examples, like I could probably go to Skyward Sword, where there's been times where she is a damsel in distress. I can go more into this, but this is more of an introductory chapter for the video so we could show that while the trope can be played straight, it can also be played with. The trope in and of itself is bad. If you were to ask me, the trope is at its best when it's being inverted or averted, and it's at its weakest when it's played straight, and it's at its worst when it actively removes agency from a much more dynamic character. Zelda in all her incarnations is a good dip into both the strengths and weaknesses of the trope, at least in my eyes. So let's get into an example that's probably going to get me skinned alive.
We're lawyers. We should be able to investigate whenever we want.
Wait, hold on. We're not lawyers, Maya.
You know, in retrospect, I bet the Ace Attorney fandom is going to be reasonable, and I doubt that I'll be having to deal with something like this.
He's dead, Jim.
I kid. I do love the Ace Attorney series. It's probably one of the best franchises I've ever played, and I'm not gonna lie, the games, the stories, the characters really were a major part of my more rebellious side and helped me develop my more critical thinking skills. It's a series I hold close to my heart. Although, now that I think about it, I promised I'd make a video on the Great Ace Attorney 2 years ago and I haven't even gotten started on that script. Oh well, we'll see how that future goes. Maybe if this video gets like 10k likes, I'll get started on it. Anyway, considering that I'm bringing up the series in this video, I think it's no surprise that the Ace Attorney series has used the trope a number of times. More often than not, it's because one of the female assistants that we've known for a while gets to be accused of murder. Emma Skye, Trucy Wright, Athena Sykes, and Kay Faraday all get accused of murder at one point or another, and it's up to you to save them. That isn't to say they don't contribute. However, each of the characters do help investigations at one point or another. It's literally why they are assistants. Emma helps with forensics when she's on the bonus case with Phoenix. Trucy helps out Apollo with investigations and brings a nice splash of color to complement the red guy. Athena has the ability to detect emotions and do therapy sessions in court, as well as act as an attorney in and of herself. Plus, she can literally judo throw someone over her head. May need to work on the aim though. And Kay has her little thief technology that can recreate crime scenes for Miles Edgeworth. Although she falls victim to the dreaded amnesia plotline. You know, now that I think about it, that's a recurring trope in the series too. Might be something to talk about in the future, who knows. I bring this up not to say that the trope in and of itself for each individual character is bad, and when I get to the main subject of this section, the same can apply to her. But the real issue I have with the trope is how it's being overused. You ever wonder how something like cinema sins get big when most of what they do and their clones often point out tropes and dinging them with a sin? Well, while that's not something I agree with, my issue lies with how often the trope gets used, especially within a singular series. The common counter-argument is to point out that what I just did, that while the characters above do become victims of false accusations and kidnappings, they still aren't exactly helpless outside those situations. Granted, sometimes yes, that is the case, but when a trope is used more and more, especially within the same series, it can be a detriment. I mean, if you keep having a slice of pizza every day, eventually you're gonna get sick of pizza, regardless of what topping you have on it. Let's see, YouTuber making a food analogy, check! And that leads us to Maya Fey. I am not a huge fan of Maya Fey. She's not horrible, she's just not my cup of tea as a character. But for the purposes of this video, well, she pretty much is a poster girl for damsels in distress in the Ace Attorney series. Let's count off the ways, shall we? When we first meet her, she's accused of killing her own sister, and Phoenix has to save her in a court case. However, in that case, when Phoenix gets accused of doing the murder, then Maya's spiritual powers allow her to channel Phoenix's mentor Mia to help save the case. After reuniting with Maya in the second game accused of murder, and unlike the first time when Mia's channeled, it's Maya's cousin Pearl who does that. Same game, Maya gets kidnapped, and Phoenix is forced to defend someone who is actually the guilty party in the case to save her. Third game, almost murdered, trapped in a cave, and then goes against Phoenix to protect the real culprit. Sixth game, where Phoenix and Maya are reunited, accused of murder. Again! And at the end of the game, kidnapped. Again! Oh, and the crossover with Professor Layton, she gets accused of being a witch and put on trial.
What makes you think she's a witch?
Well, she turned me into a newt.
A newt?
I got better.
Burn already!
Can you see how often a trope that can be used can be a bit detrimental? Overindulging on the trope can make your stories become repetitive, and even if Maya does do good things outside of that, it's going to be overshadowed by the trope in and of itself. Now, as I said before, my issue isn't with Maya herself. She's not my favorite character in the series, but I don't actively hate her like other video game characters. And I love the Ace Attorney series. Hell, may do a full retrospective later this fall if anyone's interested in that. But it's with the overuse of the trope, which is something that a lot of people do not care for, as it can come off as repeating plot beats again and again. That being said, if you were to do something like with the Legend of Zelda example and play around with the trope, that can be an excellent means of regulating this issue. And Ace Attorney, unfortunately to me, doesn't really do it all that much. It tries, but it keeps repeating the same beats. This isn't to say the characters are bad, it's just that the plot uses it a lot.
They're ready to go, and so is my heart.
Persona, a series that's both loved and seethed by the internet. If it isn't for some of the more insane takes, it's the level of polish that these RPGs have. And for the purposes of this video, we'll be looking at the whole of Persona 4 since, well, essentially the entire game's murder mystery does cycle around the game's narrative and does have a lot of damsels in distress. So let's back it up a little and explain the plot of Persona 4 just so we're all on the same page. In the town of Inaba, a string of murders have been occurring, with the victims being thrown into the world beyond the TV screen, and if they're not saved before it rains, the monsters inside the screen, known as the Shadows, will kill them and spit them back out into the real world. It's up to you and your group of friends to jump into the TV world to save the future victims and become the Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad! Superhuman Samurai! Sorry, wrong script. But yeah, this type of plot is ripe with the trope of damsels in distress, and hey, most of the characters who are kidnapped are women. But here's the rut. Much like how we discussed, Persona 4 expands upon the aspect of the trope, and at times will even turn it on its head. One of the biggest examples is how it effectively makes the trope go inside out when the guy, the myth, the legend, Kanji Tatsumi gets kidnapped. This is known as the distressed dude trope, and while a lot of people like to think that his is a bit more of a recent version of the damsel in distress, this trope has been used for quite a long time. It's why when we got the Mario movie, it was why Luigi was more of a damsel in distress than the actual iconic Princess Peach. Back on topic, Kanji Tatsumi isn't the only character who breaks the mold of the damsel in distress. Pretty much every other character that joins your party does this. Let's start with Chie Satonaka. While she isn't a kidnapped victim, you do have to save her from her shadow when she goes running off to save her friend Yukiko, and this is Chie's shadow. Man, you could make an entire paper dissecting the psychology behind that. And while you do save Chie, she then becomes an active party member who does play a vital role in rescuing her friend Yukiko. And heck, Yukiko's shadow even refers to Chie as one of the princes that would save her. Speaking of Yukiko, her shadow is literally a princess trapped in a castle, wishing to be freed from her fate of being stuck in Inaba and becoming the heir to her family's inn. She's literally wishing for a knight in shining armor to come save her from her fate. Like Chie, she becomes a part of the party, and you follow her social link, Yukiko decides to take over the inn on her own terms. I understand that Yukiko decided to take the position even after all of her hard work to leave the town left a sour taste in people's mouths, and I get it. Then we have Risei Kujikawa. Now, Risei is a bit of a different case, because while she does join the party, she doesn't actually fight. She's more of an analytical and support character to the group. It wouldn't be until Arena Ultimax that she finally becomes a playable character. She does still keep up with the party and helps with the rest of the investigation, however. Now, if we really want to talk about the aversion of the trope, there's Naoto Shirogane. Not only does she continue the investigation even after the police in the game have already decided that the case was closed and capturing a culprit, but she uses herself as bait to be able to see the kidnappings would continue. This is also when you have to consider that Naoto had to deal with a lot more issues with her position as the detective prince and the workplace issues she had to hide her gender. When she does get kidnapped, it really wasn't out of her control. Rather, it was her attempting to get more information on the case, and after she joins, not only is there confirmation that the actual culprit is still at large, she adds a lot more brain power to the team. So while the story does use the trope a lot in the game, Persona 4 at the very least changes it up a little bit between the characters, gets a dude thrown into the mix, and even explores the characters more after the fact so they're not just defined by the victimhood that the trope would do. To make it clear, while I do bring up the constant use of the trope being used as an issue to me, much like how a trope in and of itself isn't bad, the same can be said for how often a literary tool is used. Since I've already done the cliched aspect of using a food analogy,
you know it's also cliched to point this out, right?
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
but if you manage to prepare and execute the trope in various ways, as well as not having it happen to the same character, it can actually work and most people won't even notice the same plot thread being used again and again. Speaking of that...
Peaches, 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 peaches.
Come on, you knew we had to talk about her. Princess Peach. I don't need to tell you guys who Princess Peach is. She's the actual poster girl for damsels in distress. Only instead of a knight in shining armor saving her, it's a plumber from New York. Princess Peach has been a bit of a contentious figure when it comes to the damsels in distress, so when someone talks about this trope, she's one of the first faces that pops up in your head. And for good reason. There's a reason the phrase, "Your princess is in another castle," is mimetic for quite a few years. But does Peach actually fit the trope to a T? Well, not really. You see, for a damsel in distress to be in distress, she has to be unable to actually do something while she's detained. In all honesty, one could say that Princess Peach is actually a terrible example of the damsel in distress. Yeah, there are times where she does fit the trope. Hell, the plot for most of the Mario games is to save her from Bowser or some other evil of the week. There's a bit of a misconception, though, that Princess Peach is just a damsel with no personality in the games, even though there were countless games that proved otherwise. Super Princess Peach, Super Paper Mario, 3D World, those are some of the more prominent examples since in those titles Peach is a playable character, and that alone will break the trope since damsels in distress shouldn't be interactive in that genre. Let's move away from games where Peach isn't a playable character, ignoring the new one that's going to come out soon. Now, let's talk about the Paper Mario game, specifically the Thousand-Year Door, where Peach works to form a bond with the supercomputer Tech so she could send messages to Mario and learn more about what Sir Grotus was planning to do at times. And ultimately, she convinces Tech to let her go and violate his programming to do so. Sure, he gets destroyed by Grotus for betraying him, but that main point was because of Peach's kind nature. She was able to get an ally and almost escaped. There have been multiple times where Peach has played a support role and has actively tried to escape. I already brought up Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door, but there's the first Paper Mario game. There's also 3D Land and even the iconic Super Mario RPG, which is getting a remake coming soon, so that'll be fun to revisit that. I briefly brought it up, but Super Princess Peach is actually a great inversion of this trope since she's the one who has to go save Mario. Granted, there are some interesting choices in that game, like the Vibe Scepter, an item that has strange and mysterious powers. Your mom's been laughing happily a lot? Maybe, just maybe, the Vibe Scepter is hidden away in your house somewhere. Good night, everybody! Let's take a moment and consider something. Not the Vibe Scepter, something else. There have been many instances where Princess Peach goes against the damsel in distress. I remember that when the Super Mario movie came out, plenty of people made videos complaining about how the Mario movie's gone woke, simply because Peach was dressed in a racing jumpsuit. Which, by the way, she's been wearing ever since Mario Kart Wii, which was about 15 years ago. And Princess Peach is more than capable of fighting. Look at Smash tiers, and she's in some of the top tiers most of the time. No one can underestimate that booty. Funny how quick these same people changed their tune when the movie came out. Got a grift, I guess. What was I talking about? Oh, right, Princess Peach. I think part of the reason why the damsel in distress trope is thrust upon her so much, aside from her actually being kidnapped, but her breaking the core tenets of the trope constantly being ignored, is because of her personality and design. Let's think about this for a second. Princess Peach does dress like a stereotypical princess. Pink dress, long flowing blonde hair, and her personality is that of bubbly and kind. But she has a tough side to her, and isn't afraid of showing that both sides of her character are important to her. She can fight, and she can still be a fan of baking cakes. She can be a leader to her people and still fight against the dragon turtle who wants to marry her. She's a character who will stop a fight between others just for tea time. Princess Peach is a damsel in distress, but she's broken the trope so many times that she is actually a bad example of those who want to be a damsel in distress. Confusing, I know. Oh yeah, we're talking about the Yakuza series and a video about damsels in distress, which in all honesty, there's quite a bit of talk about the entire series when it comes to portrayal of women. It's a toss-up at times, but when you have a mini-game where you essentially play gambling rock, paper, scissors with women in various sexy outfits... I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there somehow. In any case, while you can find this stuff distasteful, and you can find issues with it obviously, like I take issue with one of my favorite sub-stories, where Kiryu acts as a pizza man for a foreign woman who had her visa stolen, and due to some broken language communication, Kiryu gets her a pizza instead. Of course, we meet the jackass who stole her passport and was going to force her to become a lady of the night to pay him back. Of course, Kiryu being Kiryu, he dishes the proper justice. And the guy you just beat up asks the woman to marry him. And she said yes. Mind blown. Now let me be clear. I'm not going to be on my moral high horse on the depiction of women in gaming. This isn't the video for me to complain about that. Not yet anyway. But this kind of thing can be bad depiction of women in games. Now this happens to be a character who only shows up once in the game. She's not exactly an important character in the narrative. But if we go to another sub-story, this time where a mother asks Majima to save her daughter from a cult, this is probably one of the better sub-stories in the game, and not just because you can do the hustle. After that moment of awesomeness, we're given a chance to see the leader and find the daughter. We then fight a very menacing man and deal justice. We save the daughter and reunite her with her mother. Now I bring this up because you consider both of these stories to be damsels in distress, since they do have the hallmarks of traditional uses of the trope. But let's focus on the cult for this one. Let's start with the fact that the woman in question is effectively being brainwashed by the group, essentially helpless, and it's up to the single man Majima to save the day. The only thing that can be questionable here is the motivation to save the girl. There really isn't one given, it's just Majima happens to be a good person deep down. And you can use the same methodology for the other sub-story that I brought up too, only replace Kiryu and replace the foreign woman who can barely speak Japanese. These guys just really can't turn away people who are in need. From a meta concept, looking at the player's choices, we know that there's a reason for us to be participating in these savings. It's to get a reward for completing the sub-story, as well as access to the goofier elements in the game. Again, do the hustle. Now, I bring up both these examples not to say that Yakuza 0 handles the subject poorly or greatly, but that you can take each example on its own merit and not actually generalize a game because of it. Nor does it mean you can generalize the trope, since rarely will the tropes, whether done well or poorly, will fit the trope to a T. But there is another character who we do need to talk about, and from the same game, Makoto Sawashiro. Now, this character is straight up a damsel in distress, but a justified damsel since she's integral to the plot of the game. I know I gave a spoiler warning at the beginning of the video, but I really need to give a second one here because Makoto is pretty integral to the plot of Yakuza 0, so I suggest that if you haven't played Yakuza 0 or in the middle of it or whatever, just go to the next chapter. Here, I'll even give you a few moments to do exactly that. I'll even throw the fun jingle. Okay, you had your chance. So the plot around Yakuza 0 focuses on the empty lot, a land that is necessary for the completion of the Kamurocho revitalization project, which promises massive profits to whoever completes it. And Makoto inherited the lot from her grandfather, and as such became the target for the Yakuza. The Tojo and Omi want to get her land from her because it's smack dab in the middle of all that property, and as such, she becomes the target. If that wasn't enough, the game doesn't hold back with the despair that this girl had to go through. She came to Japan to find her brother, only to be sold off to the Korean mob, which in turn left her blind. Throw in the fact that the person who saved her beforehand from this, Lee, dies, and her brother dies just before she can find him. The game makes Makoto into a justified damsel in distress with a target on her back, and it goes out of its way to make her into a very tragic character. It should also be noted that Makoto is used as a means for character development, specifically for Majima. To give context, Majima was assigned to kill Makoto so he could get a chance to get back into the Yakuza after an incident that I will not go into because that's even more spoilers, and I don't want to give another spoiler warning. However, when he learns of her identity, because he thought Makoto was Lee because Makoto happens to be a gender-neutral name, and learns of her disability, he refuses to kill her. Well, I suppose that's a stretch. He's conflicted on the matter at first, but ultimately changes his goal to protect her. He even slowly falls in love with her too. And that was actually the plan. One of the higher-ups in Yakuza, Shimano, knew that Majima wouldn't be able to kill Makoto and was planning on using them to get his hands on the lot. The goal of the damsel in distress trope can be viewed as a tool to help development for the story, or for the knight in shining armor who's tasked to save her. But in Yakuza 0, I like to think that the story also turns the knight into a tool as well for the plot. Now, you can disagree with me all you like, but I personally like this twist that turns one of the characters we've been playing to have the trope be used against him like this. I guess what I'm saying is, go play Yakuza 0, it's awesome.
Mariam, you say? Oh geez, I never heard that name before. Is it a name?
To wrap up this video, I figured we'd talk about a branch of the damsel in distress trope, the damsel out of distress. It's a relatively simple trope where the character in question decides that they can rescue themselves. Basically, they can take care of the situation. If you want a real quick example before we dive into the big one, Tifa Lockhart from Final Fantasy VII fame is quite easily considered this when you see her being taken to Don Cornero's mansion, and you have to save her. But it turns out she's just undercover to find information from the Don. Man, I got all pretty for nothing. So here's the fun aspect of this trope. It's one that can be done in conjunction with the damsel in distress, and can act as development for the character as well. It can easily become an evolution. And as such, let's talk about Mariam from Double Dragon. For those who aren't familiar with the series, Double Dragon is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with Billy and Jimmy Lee who are on a quest to save Billy's girlfriend Mariam. Mariam is probably just as famous a damsel in distress as Peach and Zelda, since the Double Dragon series is from the late 80s, with multiple sequels, crossovers, and cameos since then. The series is even getting another mainline entry, Double Dragon Gaiden Rise of the Dragons, which is coming out really soon, 27th of July. I hope this vid comes out before then. And throughout the time, Mariam's had an interesting role in the story. You got the first one where she's kidnapped by the Shadow Boss. In the direct sequel, she is killed off at the beginning, with her fate kind of being dependent on which version you're playing, but she got better. To point out something about Mariam, she is apparently a capable character. According to the official sources in the backstory, she was an assistant in Billy and Jimmy's martial art dojo, as well as working for the police as a narcotics investigator. Which is all well and good, but the game's never really used this, and the information does make her a lot more... ugh. In a Neon, she, well...
Where are my manners? I haven't introduced you to the new and improved Mariam. I call her Evil Mariam.
Gets brainwashed into becoming part of the final boss. At least she gets revenge on Skullmageddon.
I'll return one day to antagonize you, Billy and Jimmy!
This was a parody game, however, but I found it fun. Now, there were times where Mariam was playable. There was Neo Geo Double Dragon game, but that was more of a fighting game spin-off that was based on the live-action 1994 film. And the less said about that, the better. Double Dragon Gaiden does have a playable character, but the time of me scripting it hasn't been released yet. So let's bring up another game, River City Girls 2.
Back your bags, you're getting a big day by the River City Girls 2. No, you don't say the 2 part, but it says it right there.
Yeah, Mariam is actually a playable character here, and she's gone through some, changes.
Oh my god, you could grind meat on it. Ah!
Yeah, not that I'm complaining. I wouldn't mind getting broken into by her. Now to be clear, this is a different continuity of the character, but I do love the backstory and how it pretty much evolves Mariam from a damsel in distress into a monster that can kick your ass. And yeah, she's a playable character, and one who basically is pretty fun to play, especially since she just uses her fist and wrestling moves. I bring this up to point out that even though the damsel in distress trope, when played straight, can be detrimental, you can still use the trope to make fun characters and have them evolve. Mariam is a good example of that. So after all this, what are we left with? Well, I certainly won't deny that the trope has a checkered history, especially in the lore of the internet. However, I want to say something about tropes that's probably going to blow your brain. Tropes can evolve. Tropes are not set in stone, and tropes can be fun. You see, tropes are just a tool for writers to use, and like any tool, you can use it in more than one way. You just need to be creative enough to think of how to use the tool and craft something that is amazing. It's like those people who use the claw of a hammer to line up a nail before slamming into a piece of wood with the actual blunt side. I like to believe that no trope is completely bad, even the damsel in distress one. Sure, some tropes are reused, and I don't like some tropes, and some writers often overuse them or try to subvert expectations just to shock the audience. And as such, I ask my audience for two simple things. The first is to put in the comments, "Your princess is in another castle." Gotta get them comments somehow, and hey, if we get 10k likes in this video, we'll have another fun video coming on the way. The second is to not just brush off a trope when you see it. Rather, consider the possibilities, and just because you see a princess in a pink dress, you can't just assume that she's helpless or assume what the story is gonna be like for the rest of the game or whatever piece of media you're enjoying. You never know what curveballs will be thrown at you. You may like it, you may dislike it, but you gotta give it a chance. In any case, I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching. Bye bye!